Hello there, my dear friends. My name is Martha, and I'm 73 years old. I've lived through many things in my long life, but nothing prepared me for what happened to me last Tuesday. You see, I had been in the hospital for 3 days after a small heart procedure, and my son David was supposed to pick me up. But when I got home in my rented car, I found out they had changed the locks on in my house, the house I had lived in for 42 years. And that's when I discovered the most shocking truth about my own family that would change everything forever. But let me start from the beginning, so you understand how a sweet grandmother like me ended up in such a mess. It all started 3 weeks ago when I began feeling dizzy spells. At first, I thought it was just my age catching up with me. After all, when you're 73, your body starts playing tricks on you. But the dizziness got worse, and sometimes I would feel my heart racing like a horse running in a race. I live alone in my big yellow house on Maple Street. My husband George passed away 5 years ago, and since then, it's just been me and my cat, Whiskers. My son David lives about 20 minutes away with his wife Susan and their 2 children, Emma and Jake. They're good kids. Emma is 16 and Jake is 14, and they used to visit me every Sunday for dinner. I say used to because lately, David has been acting strange. He would come to visit, but instead of sitting and talking with me like we always did, he would walk around the house, looking at things. He would pick up my china plates and ask, "Mom, do you really need all these dishes?" Or he would stare at my antique furniture and say, "This old stuff takes up so much space." I thought he was just being helpful, maybe worried that I had too much clutter. You know how children worry about their parents when they get older. So I didn't think much of it. But then, 2 weeks ago, David brought some papers for me to sign. He said they were just to help him take care of my finances better, in case something happened to me. The papers had lots of big words that I didn't understand, but David is my son, and I trust him completely. He's a smart man. He works at a bank and knows about money things. So I signed them without reading everything carefully. Looking back now, I realize that was my first mistake. The second mistake was not paying attention to how Susan, his wife, had been treating me lately. Susan used to be so sweet to me. She would call me Mom and bring me flowers on special days. But recently, she seemed cold and distant. When they came for Sunday dinner, she would barely eat my food and would keep checking her phone. Sometimes I caught her whispering to David in the kitchen, and when I walked in, they would stop talking and act like nothing was wrong. Children can be so silly sometimes. They think us old folks don't notice things, but we notice everything. We just choose not to say anything because we love our families and don't want to cause trouble. Anyway, last Monday, the dizziness got so bad that I fainted in my kitchen. Luckily, my neighbor Mrs. Peterson saw me through the window and called 911. The ambulance came and took me to St. Mary's Hospital. At the hospital, Dr. Williams, a very kind young man who reminded me of my grandson Jake, told me that I had an irregular heartbeat. Nothing too serious, he said, but I needed a small procedure to fix it. He explained that they would put a tiny device in my heart to help it beat properly. "Don't worry, Mrs. Thompson," he said with a smile. "This is a very common procedure. You'll be home in 3 days, good as new." I called David right away to tell him what was happening. He sounded concerned on the phone, which made me feel better. "Don't worry about anything, Mom," he said. "Just focus on getting better. I'll handle everything at home." I thought he meant he would water my plants and feed Whiskers, like he always did when I went away. I gave him my spare key and told him where the cat food was kept. The procedure went well. For 3 days, I stayed in the hospital, resting and healing. The nurses were wonderful. They reminded me of angels in white uniforms. They brought me books to read and made sure I ate all my meals. I even made friends with my roommate, an elderly lady named Rose who was recovering from knee surgery. During those 3 days, David visited me twice. The first visit was normal. He brought me flowers and asked how I was feeling. But during the second visit, something felt different. He seemed nervous and kept looking at his watch. When I asked him about Whiskers, he said the cat was fine but didn't give me many details. "David, honey," I said, You seem worried about something. Is everything okay at work? He forced a smile and patted my hand. Everything's fine, Mom. You just focus on getting better so you can come home. But something in his voice didn't sound right. It was the same tone he used when he was 8 years old and had broken my favorite vase but was trying to hide it from me. On Tuesday morning, Dr. Williams came to check on me one last time. He listened to my heart with his stethoscope and smiled. Perfect, he said. Your heart is beating like a young person's heart now. You're ready to go home. I was so excited. I had missed my house, my garden, and especially Whiskers. I couldn't wait to sleep in my own bed again and make myself a cup of tea in my kitchen. I called David at 9 in the morning to tell him I was ready to be picked up. The phone rang and rang, but he didn't answer. I left a message. Hi sweetheart, it's Mom. Dr. Williams says I can go home today. Please come pick me up when you get this message. I love you. I waited an hour and called again. Still no answer. By noon, I was starting to worry. The nurses kept asking me when my ride was coming because they needed my room for another patient. I tried calling Susan, but her phone went straight to voicemail too. I called David's work number, and his secretary, a nice lady named Carol, told me he had taken the day off. He said he had family business to take care of, she said. This confused me even more. If he took the day off for family business, why wasn't he answering his phone? Why wasn't he here to pick up his mother from the hospital? By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I was getting desperate. The nurses were being polite, but I could tell they needed me to leave. Other patients were waiting for beds, and I was taking up space. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I walked to the hospital's information desk and asked the young lady there, "Excuse me, dear, is there a way for me to rent a car?" She looked surprised. Well, there's a rental car company right across the street from the hospital. But are you sure you should be driving so soon after your procedure? I straightened my shoulders and smiled. Honey, I've been driving for over 50 years. A little heart procedure isn't going to stop me now. And that's exactly what I did. I walked across the street, rented a small blue car, and drove myself home. During the 20-minute drive, I kept thinking about how surprised and maybe a little embarrassed David would be when he realized he had forgotten about me. I planned to be understanding. Maybe there was an emergency at work, or one of the grandchildren was sick. But when I pulled into my driveway and walked up to my front door, I got the shock of my life. My key wouldn't fit in the lock. I tried again, thinking maybe I was just tired from the hospital stay. But no, the lock was completely different. Someone had changed the locks on my house while I was away. That's when I heard voices coming from inside my house, and what I heard next made my blood run cold. I stood there on my own front porch, frozen like a statue, listening to the voices coming from inside my house. My heart, which had just been fixed by the doctors, started beating so fast I thought it might break again. The voices were clear now. It was David and Susan, and they were arguing about something. "I told you we should have waited until after the funeral," Susan's voice came through the window. "What funeral?" I whispered to myself, pressing my ear closer to the door. "Relax," David replied. "The old lady will be in that nursing home for months. By the time she figures out what's happening, we'll have everything sorted out." Old lady. Nursing home? Were they talking about me? I felt dizzy, but this time it wasn't because of my heart condition. I walked around to the side of the house where I knew the kitchen window was usually open. Sure enough, I could see right into my own kitchen, and what I saw made me want to cry. There was my son David, sitting at my kitchen table, going through a big pile of papers. Susan was packing my dishes, my good china that had belonged to my mother, into cardboard boxes. "How much do you think we can get for all this old junk?" Susan asked, holding up one of my precious teacups. "The realtor says the house could sell for at least $300,000, maybe more," David answered without even looking up from the papers. "And all this antique stuff might be worth something too." I had to grab onto the windowsill to keep from falling down. They were planning to sell my house. My house. The house where I had raised David, where I had celebrated Christmas mornings and birthday parties, where George and I had spent our whole married life together. But how could they do this? I was very much alive and definitely not in any nursing home. Then I remembered the papers David had brought me to sign 2 weeks ago. Those papers I had signed without reading carefully because I trusted my own son. I felt like someone had poured ice water all over my body. What about the cat? Susan asked. I already took it to the animal shelter yesterday, David said casually, like he was talking about throwing away garbage. Whiskers. I gasped, but luckily they didn't hear me. My poor Whiskers. My sweet cat who had been my companion for 5 years, who slept on my bed every night and purred when I felt lonely. They had thrown him away like he meant nothing. I started crying right there in my own garden, behind my own rose bushes that I had planted with my own hands. But then something happened inside me. The sadness turned into anger, and the anger made me strong. I was not going to let them steal my life. I wiped my tears and started thinking. I needed a plan, but first, I needed to understand exactly what was happening. I tiptoed back to the front door and listened again. Did you call the nursing home? Susan asked. Yeah, Shady Oaks has a bed available starting next week, David replied. I told them Mom has dementia and can't take care of herself anymore. They'll keep her there permanently. Dementia. I was sharper than most people half my age. I did crossword puzzles every day and could remember phone numbers from 40 years ago. What if she tries to leave the hospital early? Susan worried. She won't. I told the hospital staff that the family would pick her up, but then I called them this morning and said there was a family emergency and we couldn't make it until tomorrow. They'll keep her another night. So that's why no one had answered my phone calls. They were planning to leave me stranded at the hospital while they stole my house and my whole life. I realized I had to be very careful. If David could lie to doctors and convince them I had dementia, he could probably convince the police that I was just a confused old lady if I tried to report what was happening. I needed proof. I needed evidence of what they were doing. I quietly walked back to the rental car and got my purse. Luckily, I still had the cell phone that Emma had taught me to use last Christmas. She had shown me how to take pictures and record videos, even though I had told her I would never need to do such things. Well, I needed to now. I crept back to the kitchen window and started recording everything I could see. David going through my personal papers, Susan packing my belongings, boxes labeled "Donate" and "Sell" sitting on my kitchen counter. Then I heard something that made my hands shake so much I almost dropped the phone. I still feel bad about this, Susan said quietly. She's not that bad for her age. And she's always been nice to me. Nice. David laughed, but it was a cold, mean laugh I had never heard from him before. She's been nothing but a burden for years. That big house, all that medical stuff, always calling and wanting attention. This way, she'll be taken care of, and we can finally live our lives without worrying about her. A burden. My own son thought I was a burden. I thought about all the times I had babysit Emma and Jake when they were little, so David and Susan could go on dates. I thought about the money I had given them when David lost his job 3 years ago. I thought about the Christmas presents, the birthday cakes, the Sunday dinners I had cooked for years and years. And he thought I was a burden. But then I heard something even worse. What if she tries to fight this? Susan asked. She can't, David said, waving the papers in the air. She signed everything. Power of attorney, medical decisions, property transfer, everything. As far as the law is concerned, I'm in charge of everything now. She's just a helpless old woman who can't take care of herself. That's when I understood the full picture. David hadn't just lied about me having dementia. He had tricked me into signing papers that gave him control over my whole life. And now he was going to put me in a nursing home and steal everything I owned. I was so angry I wanted to march right through that front door and tell them exactly what I thought of their plan. But I knew that wouldn't be smart. If I confronted them now, they would just call the police and tell them I was confused and dangerous. No, I needed a better plan. I walked back to the rental car and sat in the driver's seat, thinking hard. What would George do if he were here? George had always been the smart one when it came to dealing with difficult people. Think like a detective. I could almost hear his voice saying, "Gather evidence first, then strike back." That's exactly what I would do. I started the car and drove to the public library downtown. The librarian, a sweet young man named Tom, helped me use the computer to look up information about elder abuse and fraud. What I learned made me even more angry, but also more determined. What David was doing was called elder financial abuse, and it was a serious crime. The website said that children who do this to their parents can go to jail for years and have to pay back all the money they stole. I also learned about something called legal aid, lawyers who help people who don't have much money. I wrote down several phone numbers. But first, I had one more stop to make. The animal shelter was only 10 minutes away from the library. I walked in and asked the lady at the desk, "Excuse me, did someone bring in an orange tabby cat yesterday? His name is Whiskers." Her face lit up. "Oh yes. Such a sweet cat. The man who brought him in said he was moving and couldn't keep him anymore. Are you interested in adopting him?" "I'm very interested," I said, trying not to let her hear how angry I was at David's lies. 20 minutes later, Whiskers was in a cat carrier in the back seat of my rental car, purring like a little motor. When he saw me, he meowed so loudly, like he was telling me all about his terrible adventure. "Don't worry, sweet boy," I told him. "Grandma's going to fix everything." But as I drove toward downtown to find a motel for the night, I realized I had a big problem. I couldn't go back to my house, and I couldn't let David know that I knew what he was doing. I needed somewhere safe to stay while I figured out my next move. That's when I remembered my old friend Betty, who lived across town. Betty and I had known each other since we were young mothers, and she was one of the few people I could trust completely. I drove to Betty's house and knocked on her door. When she opened it and saw me standing there with a cat carrier and a confused expression, she immediately knew something was wrong. "Martha, what on earth are you doing here? David called me this morning and said you were still in the hospital." "Betty," I said, "I need your help, and you're not going to believe what I'm about to tell you." I spent the next hour telling Betty everything that had happened. She made us both tea and gave Whiskers some tuna while I showed her the video I had recorded and explained about the papers I had signed. "That little snake," Betty said when I finished. She was so angry that her hands were shaking. "How dare he do this to you? You raised him, you loved him, you gave him everything." "I know," I said sadly. "But Betty, what am I going to do? He has all those legal papers I signed. What if he's right and I can't fight this?" Betty stood up and put her hands on her hips, the way she used to do when we were young mothers dealing with difficult children. "Martha Thompson," she said firmly, "you listen to me. You are one of the smartest, strongest women I know. You survived raising 3 children mostly by yourself when George was working those long hours. You took care of your sick mother for 5 years. You learned how to use a computer when you were 70 years old. You are not going to let that ungrateful boy steal your life." Her words made me feel stronger, but I was still scared. "But what if Dash," I started to say. That's when Betty's phone rang. She answered it, and I could hear a man's voice on the other end, sounding very upset and angry. "Betty, it's David Thompson. Have you seen my mother? She's missing from the hospital and we're very worried about her. She might be confused and dangerous because of her medical condition." I looked at Betty, and Betty looked at me. This was it, the moment when I had to decide if I was going to fight back or let them win. Betty winked at me and said into the phone, "No, David, I haven't seen your mother. But if I do, I'll be sure to let you know right away." After she hung up, I realized that David was probably calling everyone we knew, telling them I was confused and missing. Soon, the whole town would be looking for a dangerous old lady who didn't even exist. "Betty," I said, "I think we're in more trouble than I thought." That's when we heard car doors slamming outside, and through the window, we saw 2 police cars pulling into Betty's driveway. My heart jumped into my throat when I saw those police cars. Betty grabbed my arm and whispered, "Quick! Upstairs to the guest room with Whiskers. Don't make a sound." I picked up the cat carrier and hurried up the stairs as fast as my 73-year-old legs could carry me. From the guest room window, I could see two police officers walking toward Betty's front door. One was a tall man with gray hair, and the other was a younger woman with kind eyes. I heard Betty open the front door downstairs. "Good evening, officers. How can I help you?" Betty's voice sounded perfectly calm, like she had nothing to hide. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Johnson and this is Officer Martinez," the tall man said. "We're looking for a missing person, Martha Thompson, age 73. Her family is very worried about her. She left the hospital this afternoon without being properly discharged, and they're concerned she might be confused or disoriented." I felt angry all over again. There was David, lying to the police now. "Oh my," Betty said, and I could tell she was acting surprised. "Martha missing? That doesn't sound like her at all. She's always been very responsible. When was the last time you spoke with her?" Officer Martinez asked. "Let me think. It must have been about a week ago. She called to tell me she was going into the hospital for a heart procedure. I meant to visit her, but I've been dealing with my own health issues." Betty was so good at this. She wasn't technically lying, but she wasn't telling them I was hiding upstairs either. "Her son David is very worried," Officer Johnson continued. "He says she's been showing signs of memory problems lately, and with her recent medical procedure, she might not be thinking clearly. If you see her, please call us immediately. She could be dangerous to herself or others." Dangerous? Me? The woman who couldn't even squash a spider without feeling guilty. "Of course, officers. I certainly will. Is there anything else I can do to help?" Betty asked. "Just keep an eye out. She might try to contact old friends since she can't get into her house. The family had to change the locks for security reasons while she was in the hospital." Security reasons. I wanted to march downstairs and tell those officers exactly what kind of security David was worried about, securing my house for himself. After the police left, I waited a few more minutes before coming downstairs. Betty was peeking out the window, making sure they were really gone. "Well," she said, "now we know how serious this is. David's not just stealing your house. He's making sure everyone thinks you're crazy so no one will believe you if you try to stop him." I sank into Betty's comfortable armchair and felt more hopeless than ever. Maybe I should just give up. If the police think I'm dangerous, and David has all those legal papers. "Absolutely not," Betty interrupted. "Martha, do you remember when we were young mothers and the school tried to put your Emma in the wrong class because they said she wasn't smart enough?" I nodded. Emma had always been bright, but she was shy and didn't test well. "You didn't give up then. You marched into that school every day for 2 weeks until they tested her properly and put her where she belonged. You fought for your daughter then, and now you need to fight for yourself." Betty was right. I had always been a fighter when it came to protecting the people I loved. Now I needed to protect myself. "Okay," I said, feeling stronger. "What do we do?" "First, we call one of those legal aid lawyers you found at the library. But we do it smart. We don't tell them where you are until we know we can trust them." Betty got her phone and dialed the first number on my list. After explaining the situation to 3 different people, we finally got to talk to a lawyer named Sarah Mills. "Mrs. Thompson," Sarah said when Betty handed me the phone, "what you're describing sounds like a clear case of elder abuse and fraud. The good news is that even if you signed those papers, they might not be legal if you were tricked into signing them." Really? I felt hope for the first time all day. "Yes. But I need to see exactly what you signed, and we need to document everything that's happening. Are you somewhere safe right now?" I looked at Betty, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, I'm with a trusted friend." "Good. Don't contact your son or let him know where you are until we can build a case. Can you meet me tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.? My office is downtown at 412 Main Street. After I hung up, Betty and I spent the evening planning. We made a list of everything David had done, all the lies he had told, and all the evidence I had. Betty even helped me organize the video I had recorded on my phone. You know what we need, Betty said around 10 p.m. We need more evidence. If David thinks you're still missing, he might do something else tonight that we can catch him doing. What do you mean? Think about it. He told the police the locks were changed for security reasons. But you saw him and Susan packing your things today. What if they're planning to take even more stuff tonight, while everyone thinks you're lost and confused somewhere? Betty was brilliant. If we could catch David stealing more of my belongings, it would prove to everyone that this wasn't about keeping me safe, it was about robbery. But how can we watch the house without being seen? I asked. Betty smiled mischievously. Do you remember my nephew Rick? The one who's always making those movies with his camera. Rick was Betty's sister's son, about 25 years old, and he was studying to be a filmmaker. He was a good boy, very creative and smart. Rick has all kinds of fancy camera equipment, Betty continued. And he's been looking for an interesting project for his school assignment. I think he'd be very interested in helping his Aunt Betty's friend catch some criminals. We called Rick, and Betty explained the situation. At first, he thought we were joking, but when Betty convinced him we were serious, he got very excited. This is like a real-life mystery movie, he said. I can set up cameras that will record everything, even in the dark. And they're so small, no one will ever see them. An hour later, Rick arrived at Betty's house with a bag full of equipment that looked like something from a science fiction movie. He was a tall, skinny young man with curly hair and excited eyes. Okay, Mrs. Thompson, he said. Tell me everything. After I explained the whole story again, Rick was furious. That's terrible. How can a son do that to his own mother? Don't worry. We're going to catch him red-handed. But first, we had to figure out how to get close enough to my house to set up the cameras without being seen. I have an idea, Rick said. What time does your son usually go to bed? David's always been an early sleeper. He's usually in bed by 10:30, and he sleeps very deeply. When he was little, we used to joke that a marching band couldn't wake him up. Rick looked at his watch. It was already 11 p.m. Perfect. We'll wait until midnight, then sneak over there and set up the cameras. If he's planning to take more stuff, he'll probably do it early in the morning when no neighbors are awake. I was nervous about going back to my house, even just to hide cameras. What if David saw us? What if the police came back? But Betty squeezed my hand. We can do this, Martha. We're going to get your life back. At midnight, the three of us drove quietly to my neighborhood in Rick's car. He parked 2 blocks away, and we walked through the shadows to my house. My heart was beating so fast I was worried it might set off my new heart device. Rick was amazing. He moved like a cat in the darkness, setting up tiny cameras in my bushes, near my windows, and even one in the big oak tree that could see the whole front of the house. The cameras were so small they looked like little black rocks. These will record everything for 48 hours, he whispered. If your son takes anything out of that house, we'll have it all on video. As we were finishing up, I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. It was the sound of my front door opening. We all ducked behind my rose bushes and held our breath. Someone was coming out of my house at 12:30 in the morning, carrying what looked like a large box. In the moonlight, I could see it was David. But he wasn't alone. There was another man with him, someone I didn't recognize. They were both carrying boxes and loading them into a truck that was parked in my driveway. Are you getting this? I whispered to Rick. He nodded, pointing to a small device in his hand. Every second. We watched as David and the stranger made several trips, carrying out boxes and even some of my furniture. My kitchen table, the one where George and I had eaten breakfast every morning for 30 years. My mother's rocking chair. My photo albums full of family pictures. They were stealing my whole life, one piece at a time. But the worst part was yet to come. As we watched from the bushes, Susan came out of the house carrying something that made me gasp out loud. She was holding George's military uniform, the one he had worn when he served in Vietnam, the one I had carefully preserved in our bedroom closet. She tossed it carelessly into the truck like it was garbage. I started to stand up, ready to run out there and stop them, but Betty grabbed my arm and Rick put his hand over my mouth. "Not yet," Betty whispered urgently. "Let them finish. We need to see everything they're doing." It was the hardest thing I had ever done, watching strangers steal my memories while I hid in my own garden like a criminal. After about an hour, the truck was full. David locked my front door, and the three of them stood in my driveway talking quietly. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see David handing the stranger money. Then something happened that changed everything. The stranger pointed at the house and said something that made David shake his head angrily. They started arguing, and their voices got louder. "Told you we had to wait," the stranger said. "Need the money now," David replied. Then the stranger said something that made my heart stop. "What if the old lady comes back? What if she's not as confused as you said?" David's answer made me feel sick. "Don't worry about her. She'll never be coming back here again." The way he said it, so cold and final, made me realize that David's plan was even worse than I had thought. He wasn't just planning to put me in a nursing home. He was planning to make sure I could never leave. The cold way David said those words, "She'll never be coming back here again," sent chills down my spine. What exactly did he mean by that? And why did he sound so sure about it? After the truck drove away and David went back inside my house, the three of us crept back to Rick's car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely buckle my seatbelt. "Did you hear what he said about me never coming back?" I whispered to Betty and Rick as we drove back to Betty's house. "I heard it," Rick said grimly. "And I recorded it too. Mrs. Thompson, I think your son is planning something even worse than just stealing your house." When we got back to Betty's, we sat around her kitchen table and watched the video Rick had captured on his equipment. Seeing it on the screen made it even more real and frightening. There was my own son, stealing from me in the middle of the night like a common thief. "We need to take this to the police," Betty said. "But they already think I'm a confused old lady," I reminded her. "What if they don't believe us?" "They'll have to believe this video," Rick said. "This proves that David lied about everything. People don't change locks for security reasons and then sneak around stealing stuff in the middle of the night." But I was still worried about what David had meant about me never coming back. It sounded like more than just putting me in a nursing home. It sounded like, well, I didn't want to think about what it sounded like. "Betty," I said slowly, "what if David is planning to do something to me? What if the nursing home is just the beginning?" Betty's face went pale. "What do you mean?" "Think about it. He's already told everyone I have dementia. He's convinced the police I'm dangerous and confused. If something happened to me, who would question it? Everyone would just think it was a sad accident, a confused old lady who wandered off and got hurt." Rick's eyes got wide. "You think he's planning to hurt you?" I didn't want to believe it, but the pieces were starting to fit together in a horrible way. "I think David is planning to get rid of me permanently, and he's setting it up so that no one will suspect him." We sat in silence for a moment, letting this terrible possibility sink in. Then Betty stood up with determination. "Well, if that's his plan, we're going to stop him. But first, we need to figure out exactly what he's up to." "How do we do that?" I asked. "We're going to do some detective work," Betty said. "Rick, can you keep watching the house with those cameras?" "Absolutely. I can monitor everything from my laptop." "Good. And Martha, tomorrow we're going to see that lawyer and show her this video. But tonight, I think we need to find out more about this nursing home David mentioned, Shady Oaks." Betty got her computer and we looked up Shady Oaks nursing home online. What we found made my stomach turn. The reviews were terrible. People complained about patients being neglected, about family members not being allowed to visit, about residents who went in healthy and came out much worse, or didn't come out at all. "Look at this," Betty said, pointing to one review. "This woman says her father went into Shady Oaks for temporary care after surgery, but the family wasn't allowed to see him for weeks. When they finally got him out, he was completely different, confused and scared and much sicker than when he went in." Another review was even worse. "My mother died at Shady Oaks under suspicious circumstances. The staff said she fell, but she never had balance problems before. The family was not notified until hours after she died." I felt sick reading these reviews. This wasn't just a bad nursing home. It was a place where people disappeared. "Betty," I said quietly, "I think David chose this place on purpose. I think he knows what kind of place it is." "You mean he's planning to put you somewhere that—" Betty couldn't finish the sentence. "Somewhere that old people go in healthy and don't come out alive," I finished for her. Rick had been quietly reading over our shoulders, and now he looked up with anger in his young eyes. "We're not going to let that happen. We're going to stop him." But before we could make any more plans, Betty's phone rang. It was almost 2 a.m. Who would be calling at this hour? Betty looked at the caller ID and her face went white. "It's David." "Don't answer it," I whispered, but she was already picking up the phone. "Hello," Betty said, trying to sound sleepy. I could hear David's voice through the phone, and he sounded upset and angry. "Betty, I'm sorry to call so late, but we're really desperate. The police think my mother might try to contact you. She's been missing for almost 12 hours now, and we're worried she might hurt herself or someone else." "Oh my goodness," Betty said, acting surprised. "Still no sign of her?" "No, and it's getting worse. We found out she somehow got a rental car. Betty, she's driving around confused and disoriented. She could cause an accident and kill someone." This was a new lie. David was making me sound like a dangerous driver now. "The police want to put out an alert for the rental car," David continued. "If she contacts you, you have to call 911 immediately. Don't try to talk to her or reason with her. Just call for help right away." "Of course. David, what kind of car is she driving?" "A blue compact car from Hertz. The license plate is—" David gave Betty the license plate number of my rental car. After he hung up, Betty looked at me with worry. "Martha, this is getting serious. If the police are looking for your car, we can't keep you hidden much longer." "What am I going to do?" I felt panicked. I can't drive anywhere, I can't go home, and if David finds me— "You're going to stay right here," Betty said firmly. "But we need to return that rental car first thing in the morning and figure out another way to get around." Rick was thinking hard. "Actually, I have a better idea. What if we use the rental car as bait?" "What do you mean?" Betty and I asked at the same time. "Well, if David thinks your mom is driving around confused, maybe we can make him think she's going to show up somewhere that would be really inconvenient for him. Somewhere that would force him to act quickly and maybe make mistakes." I was starting to understand Rick's idea. "You mean make him think I'm going to expose his plan?" "Exactly. What if he thought you were planning to go to the bank tomorrow, or to a lawyer, or to the police station? He'd have to do something to stop you, and when he does, we'll be ready with cameras to catch him," Betty finished. It was a dangerous plan, but it might be our only chance to get proof of what David was really planning to do to me. We spent the next hour working out the details. Rick would drive the rental car to different places around town tomorrow. The bank, the police station, the lawyer's office, making sure he was seen but not caught. This would make David think I was trying to get help. Meanwhile, Betty and I would actually go see the lawyer Sarah Mills and show her our evidence. "The key is timing," Rick explained. "If David thinks you're about to expose him, he'll have to act fast. And when people rush, they make mistakes." It was a good plan, but I was still scared. What if something goes wrong? What if David catches Rick? What if he figures out I'm staying here with Betty? Hey, Rick said with a confident smile. I make movies about catching bad guys. I know how this works. Besides, your son is an amateur criminal. He's not as smart as he thinks he is. I hoped Rick was right, but I had a feeling that tomorrow was going to be the most dangerous day of my life. We all tried to get some sleep, but I kept waking up every hour, listening for sounds that might mean David had found us. Poor Whiskers seemed to sense my nervousness. He stayed curled up right next to me all night, purring softly like he was trying to comfort me. At 6 a.m., Rick's laptop started beeping. He had set it up to alert us if the cameras at my house detected any movement. They're back, Rick whispered urgently, showing us the laptop screen. David and Susan were at my house again, but this time they had a van instead of a truck. And they weren't alone. There were 3 other people with them, including the stranger from last night. They're taking more stuff, I said, watching them carry out my living room furniture. My couch, my coffee table. That's George's favorite armchair they're carrying. But then something happened that made us all gasp. A woman I didn't recognize came out of my house carrying a large can of gasoline. Why would they need gasoline? Betty whispered. Rick's face went very serious. I don't think they're just planning to rob the house. I think they're planning to burn it down. Burn down my house? I couldn't believe what I was seeing. But why? Think about it, Rick said grimly. If the house burns down, there's no evidence of what they stole. Plus, if everyone thinks you're confused and missing, and then your house mysteriously burns down. I understood what he meant, and it made me feel sick. Everyone would think I came home confused and accidentally started a fire. And if I was inside when it happened, it would look like a tragic accident, Betty finished quietly. We watched in horror as the woman with the gasoline walked around my house, splashing it on the walls and foundations. They were really going to burn down my home, the house where I had lived for over 40 years, where I had raised my children and grown old with my husband. But I also realized something else. They were planning to do this while everyone thought I was still missing. Which meant they expected me to be found inside the burned house. Which meant David was planning to bring me back to the house before they burned it down. Oh my God, I whispered. They're not just going to burn the house. They're planning to make sure I'm inside when it happens. Rick immediately started recording everything on his laptop while Betty called 911. But before Betty could finish dialing, we heard car doors slamming outside her house. Through the window, we could see 2 cars pulling into Betty's driveway. David was in one car, and there were several men I didn't recognize in the other car. They had found us. Quick, Betty whispered urgently. Back upstairs. And whatever happens, don't come down until I tell you it's safe. But as I grabbed Whiskers and headed for the stairs, I heard David's voice outside, and what he said made my blood freeze. We know she's in there, and we're not leaving without her. I clutched Whiskers to my chest and ran up the stairs as quietly as I could, my heart pounding so loud I was sure everyone could hear it. Betty quickly hid Rick's laptop and cameras, then went to answer the door like nothing was wrong. From the upstairs window, I could see David standing on Betty's front porch with 3 men I had never seen before. They looked rough and unfriendly, not the kind of people my son would normally spend time with. I heard Betty open the front door downstairs. David, what a surprise to see you so early in the morning, Betty said, and I could tell she was trying to sound normal. Cut the act, Betty. David's voice was cold and mean, so different from the son I thought I knew. We know my mother is here. Her rental car was spotted in this neighborhood last night. My heart sank. Somehow they had traced the car here. I'm sorry, but I have no idea what you're talking about, Betty replied calmly. As I told the police officers last night, I haven't seen Martha. Then you won't mind if we look around, said a gruff voice I didn't recognize. Actually, I do mind, Betty said firmly. This is my home, and you can't just barge in here without a warrant. There was a moment of silence, then I heard David say something that chilled me to the bone. Betty, you don't understand how serious this situation is. My mother is very sick. She's dangerous. If you're hiding her, You could get in serious trouble. And if you don't let us in, the gruff voice added, we might have to call the police and tell them you're interfering with a family emergency. I could hear the threat in his voice. These weren't just concerned family members. These were criminals. From my hiding spot in the guest room, I watched through the window as one of the men walked around to the back of Betty's house. They were surrounding the place. I had to do something. I couldn't let Betty get hurt because of me. But then I heard Rick's voice downstairs, and I realized he hadn't come upstairs with me. Hey, what's going on here? Rick said, and I could tell he was pretending he had just woken up. Who are you? David demanded. I'm Rick, Betty's nephew. I'm staying here for a few days while I work on a college project. Who are you guys? We're looking for this man's mother, the gruff voice said. She's missing and might be dangerous. Dangerous? Rick sounded genuinely surprised. You mean like Mrs. Thompson? She's always seemed really nice when I've met her. Good boy, Rick. He was making it sound like he knew me but hadn't seen me recently. When did you last see her? David asked quickly. Oh, it's been weeks. Maybe longer. I don't really keep track. Rick was doing great at sounding casual and uninterested. I heard footsteps on the stairs, and my heart nearly stopped. Someone was coming up to search the house. I looked around the guest room frantically. There was nowhere to hide, just a bed, a dresser, and a small closet. I grabbed Whiskers and squeezed into the closet, pulling the door almost closed but leaving it open just a crack so I could see out. Heavy footsteps came down the hall, and then the door to the guest room opened. One of the rough-looking men walked in and started looking around. He checked under the bed, looked behind the dresser, and then walked straight toward the closet. This was it. We were caught. But just as he reached for the closet door handle, Rick's voice called from downstairs. Hey, mister. You might want to see this. The man stopped and turned around. What is it? I found something outside that might help you find the missing lady. The man left the room quickly, and I heard him rushing downstairs. I stayed in the closet, barely breathing, holding Whiskers so tightly he probably couldn't breathe either. Through the closet crack, I could see out the guest room window to the street below. Rick was showing the men something near his car. I couldn't see what it was, but whatever he was doing, it was working. All of them, including David, were gathered around Rick, looking at whatever he was showing them. That's when I heard Betty's voice, very quietly, from the bottom of the stairs. Martha, if you can hear me, Rick found a way to distract them, but you need to get out of the house now. Go out the back door and hide in my garden shed. Hurry. I didn't need to be told twice. I crept out of the closet, down the hall, and down the back stairs that led to Betty's kitchen. Through the kitchen window, I could see all the men still gathered around Rick's car in the front yard. I slipped out the back door with Whiskers and ran across Betty's backyard to her garden shed. It was small and dark and smelled like fertilizer, but at least it was a hiding place. Through a crack in the shed wall, I could see what was happening in the front yard. Rick was showing the men what looked like a piece of cloth caught on his car antenna. I found this when I came out this morning, Rick was saying. It looks like it might be from an old lady's sweater or something. David grabbed the cloth and examined it closely. This could be from her cardigan, he said excitedly. Which direction were you driving when this got caught on your car? I went to the all-night diner on Oak Street around midnight, Rick said. The cloth wasn't there when I left, so it must have gotten caught when I was parked at the diner. Brilliant. Rick was sending them on a wild goose chase across town. She must be hiding somewhere near the diner, David said. Let's go check it out. I watched as all the men got back in their cars and drove away quickly, but I stayed in the shed for another 10 minutes, just to make sure they were really gone. Finally, Betty came out to the garden shed. Are you okay? She whispered. I'm fine, but Betty, we're in terrible danger. Did you see those men with David? They weren't family friends. They looked like criminals. I know. And did you hear how David talked to me? He's not the same person anymore, Martha. I think desperation has made him dangerous. We went back into the house, where Rick was pacing around the living room, looking excited and nervous at the same time. "That was incredible," he said. "Did you see how they bought the whole story about the cloth? I just tore a piece off an old shirt and rubbed it on my car antenna." "You were very brave," I told him, "but now they know someone is helping me. That makes this even more dangerous for all of us." "Which is why we need to move fast," Betty said. "Martha, we're taking you to see that lawyer right now. And Rick, can you keep monitoring the cameras at Martha's house?" "Already on it," Rick said, opening his laptop. "And you guys need to see this." The camera footage from my house showed that David and his criminal friends had finished loading the van with my belongings. But more importantly, we could see the woman with the gasoline can finishing her work around the house. "They're going to burn it down today," Rick said grimly. "Probably as soon as they think they've found you." The full horror of David's plan was becoming clear. He was going to tell everyone he had found me confused and brought me home to rest. Then somehow, there would be a tragic fire, and poor confused Martha would be found dead in her own house. David would inherit everything, and no one would ever suspect that he had murdered his own mother. "We have to stop them," I said. "And we have to do it today." Betty grabbed her car keys. "Then let's go see that lawyer right now." But as we were getting ready to leave, Rick's laptop started beeping again. The cameras had detected more movement at my house. "Oh no," Rick said, staring at the screen. "You guys, we have a big problem." On the screen, we could see David's car pulling into my driveway. But he wasn't alone. In the passenger seat was someone who made my heart stop. It was Emma, my 16-year-old granddaughter. "Why would he bring Emma?" I gasped. "Because," Betty said slowly, "he needs a witness. Someone innocent who can tell the police that Grandma seemed confused when they found her. Someone who will cry at the funeral and make everyone feel sorry for the family." I felt sick. David was planning to use his own daughter, my beloved granddaughter, as part of his plan to murder me. But then something even worse appeared on the camera. David was getting out of the car, and in his hand was a syringe. "What's that for?" Rick asked. I had a terrible feeling I knew exactly what it was for. "It's probably a sedative. Something to make me unconscious so I can't fight back when they set the fire." "This ends now," Betty said firmly. "Rick, call the police and tell them there's about to be a murder at Martha's house. Tell them to send fire trucks too, in case we're too late to stop the fire." "What about Emma?" I asked desperately. "I can't let her see her grandfather being arrested. And what if David tries to hurt her to keep her quiet?" "That's why we're going there ourselves," Betty said. "We're going to save Emma, stop David, and end this nightmare once and for all." As we rushed out to Betty's car, I realized that after 3 days of running and hiding, I was finally going to face my son and fight for my life. But I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Emma too. Because if David was evil enough to murder his own mother, what would he do to his daughter if she found out the truth? "Hurry, Betty," I said as we raced through the streets toward my house. "I'm not going to let that monster hurt my granddaughter." But when we turned onto my street, we could already see smoke rising from the direction of my house. The smoke was getting thicker as we drove down my street, and my heart was beating so fast I thought it might explode. Betty pressed harder on the gas pedal, and Rick was frantically talking to the 911 operator on his phone. "Yes, there's a fire at 247 Maple Street, and we think someone might be trapped inside," Rick was saying. "Please hurry." When we got to my house, the scene was like something from a nightmare. Smoke was pouring out of the back windows, and I could see orange flames starting to flicker inside what used to be my kitchen. David's car was still in the driveway, but I couldn't see David or Emma anywhere. "Where are they?" I cried, jumping out of Betty's car before it had even stopped completely. That's when I heard it, Emma's voice, crying and calling for help. The sound was coming from inside my burning house. "Emma!" I screamed, and started running toward the front door. Betty grabbed my arm. "Martha, no. The house is on fire." I don't care. That's my granddaughter in there. But before I could take another step, the front door opened and David came stumbling out, coughing and carrying Emma in his arms. Emma looked unconscious. Her head was hanging to one side and her arms were limp. Help! David yelled when he saw us. Something's wrong with Emma. She just collapsed. He was acting like a concerned father, but I could see the syringe sticking out of his jacket pocket. He had drugged his own daughter. What did you do to her? I demanded, rushing toward them. David's face changed completely when he saw me. The fake concern disappeared, and his eyes became cold and angry. You, he said. You're supposed to be dead. David Thompson. Betty shouted. Put that girl down right now. But David backed away from us, still holding the unconscious Emma. You don't understand, he said desperately. This wasn't supposed to happen this way. Emma wasn't supposed to be here. Then why did you bring her? I asked, trying to get closer to my granddaughter. Because I needed a witness. Someone to say they saw you confused and acting strange. But then she started asking too many questions about why we were here, and why the house smelled like gasoline. So Emma had figured out something was wrong. My smart granddaughter had realized her father was up to something evil. She said she was going to call her mother, David continued, sounding more and more panicked. I couldn't let her ruin everything. I had to give her something to keep her quiet. The sound of sirens was getting closer, but I was afraid they wouldn't arrive in time. The fire was spreading quickly, and David was holding Emma too close to the burning house. David, I said, trying to keep my voice calm even though I was terrified. Give me Emma and let's talk about this. You're her father. You don't want to hurt her. I never wanted to hurt anyone. David shouted. But you just wouldn't cooperate. You could have gone to the nursing home quietly, and none of this would have happened. You mean I could have let you murder me quietly, I said. David's face twisted with anger. You don't understand. Do you know how much debt I'm in? How much money I owe? Susan wants to leave me, the bank is threatening to take our house, and I lost my job 3 months ago. I was shocked. You lost your job? David, why didn't you tell me? I could have helped you. With what? Your Social Security check. I need hundreds of thousands of dollars, not $20 here and there. So you decided to steal my house and kill me for the insurance money, Betty said angrily. It wasn't supposed to be murder. David protested. Shady Oaks was supposed to take care of that part. Old people die there all the time from accidents and medical complications. No one asks questions. I felt sick hearing him talk about my death so casually, like it was just a business transaction. The fire trucks were getting very close now, and David was looking around desperately, like a trapped animal. David, I said, the police are coming. The fire department is coming. This is over. Just put Emma down and let's end this before someone really gets hurt. But instead of surrendering, David did something that made my blood run cold. He started backing toward the burning house, still carrying Emma. If I can't have the money, he said, then no one gets anything. Emma and I will just disappear in the fire together. A tragic accident, father trying to save daughter, both overcome by smoke. No! I screamed. That's when Rick did something incredibly brave. While David was focused on me and Betty, Rick had crept around the side of the house. Now he jumped out from behind a bush and tackled David from behind. David stumbled and dropped Emma onto the grass. She was still unconscious, but at least she was away from the fire now. David and Rick wrestled on the ground while Betty and I ran to Emma. I checked her pulse. It was slow but steady. Whatever David had given her, she was still alive. Emma, sweetheart, wake up, I whispered, stroking her hair. Grandma's here. Behind us, David had managed to get away from Rick and was now standing between us and Betty's car, blocking our escape route. He looked wild and desperate, and I could see he was holding something in his hand. It was a knife. This is all your fault, he yelled at me. If you had just signed those papers and gone quietly to Shady Oaks, none of this would have happened. Emma would be safe, and you would just be gone. David, please, I begged. Look at what you're doing. Look at your daughter lying unconscious on the ground because of what you did to her. Is this really the man you want to be? For just a moment, I saw a flicker of the old David in his eyes. My little boy who used to cry when he accidentally stepped on a bug, who used to bring me drawings he made in school and hugs when I was sad. But then the moment passed, and the cold stranger was back. It's too late, he said, raising the knife. I've come too far to stop now. That's when the first fire truck came screaming around the corner, followed by 2 police cars and an ambulance. The cavalry had finally arrived. But David wasn't finished yet. When he saw the emergency vehicles, he did something that shocked everyone. He ran straight into my burning house. David, no! I screamed, but it was too late. He had disappeared into the smoke and flames. The firefighters jumped off their truck and immediately started working to put out the fire, while the paramedics rushed over to check on Emma. The police surrounded the property, but there was nothing anyone could do for David. The house was too dangerous to enter. Ma'am, we need to get you away from the house, one of the firefighters told me. The fire is spreading fast, and there might be an explosion if it reaches the gas line. But I couldn't leave. Not while David was still inside. Even after everything he had done, he was still my son. Please, I begged the fire chief. Can't you get him out? The fire chief, a kind-looking man with gray hair, put his hand on my shoulder. Ma'am, I'm sorry. The house is fully engulfed now. No one could survive in there. As we watched from a safe distance, my beautiful yellow house, the home where I had spent most of my adult life, burned to the ground. 42 years of memories, going up in smoke. But the worst part was knowing that David was somewhere inside those flames. The paramedics were working on Emma, and one of them called out, "She's waking up." I rushed over to the ambulance where they had Emma on a stretcher. Her eyes were fluttering open, and she looked confused and scared. "Grandma," she whispered when she saw me. "What's happening? Where's Dad?" I didn't know how to tell her that her father had just tried to murder me, had drugged her, and was now probably dead in the burning house behind us. "There was a fire, sweetheart," I said gently. "But you're safe now. I remember. Dad brought me here, and something smelled funny. Like gasoline. When I asked him about it, he got really angry and..." She tried to sit up, but the paramedic gently pushed her back down. "Just rest, honey. We're going to take you to the hospital to make sure you're okay." As the ambulance drove away with Emma, a police detective came over to talk to me. Her name was Detective Rodriguez, and she looked very serious. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, "we've been getting some very interesting reports about you and your son. I think we need to talk." I spent the next 2 hours telling Detective Rodriguez everything that had happened. I showed her Rick's videos, explained about the papers David had tricked me into signing, and told her about his plan to put me in Shady Oaks nursing home. "This is one of the most elaborate elder abuse cases I've ever seen," Detective Rodriguez said when I finished. "Your son was planning to commit the perfect murder." "Was planning," I repeated sadly. "I guess it doesn't matter now." But Detective Rodriguez shook her head. "Actually, Mrs. Thompson, I have some news that might surprise you." She pointed toward the smoking remains of my house, where the firefighters were still working. "We found your son." My heart jumped. "Is he?" "He's alive. Badly burned and unconscious from smoke inhalation, but alive. The firefighters found him in your basement, where he had apparently tried to hide from the fire." I didn't know whether to feel relieved or disappointed. Part of me was glad my son wasn't dead, but another part of me knew that he would have to face justice for what he had tried to do. "He's been taken to the hospital," Detective Rodriguez continued. "When he recovers, he'll be arrested for attempted murder, elder abuse, fraud, and arson." As I stood there looking at the ashes of my home, Betty came over and put her arm around me. "I'm so sorry about your house, Martha," she said. It's just a building, I replied, surprising myself with how calm I felt. I'm alive, Emma is safe, and the truth finally came out. That's what matters. But even as I said it, I realized that my life had been completely destroyed. I had no home, no belongings, and my own son had tried to kill me. What was I supposed to do now? That's when Rick came running over with his laptop, looking excited about something. Mrs. Thompson, you need to see this, he said. I was reviewing all the camera footage, and I found something amazing. He showed me the laptop screen, and what I saw there made me gasp. It was footage of David and Susan from yesterday, but this time they were talking to someone on the phone. Rick had managed to enhance the audio so we could hear their conversation clearly. Yes, we understand, David was saying into the phone. You take care of the old lady permanently, and we'll split the insurance money with you 50-50. The voice on the other end was cold and professional. Shady Oaks specializes in these situations. We have methods that are completely undetectable. Natural causes, medical complications, accidents. We can arrange whatever you prefer. I felt sick. Shady Oaks wasn't just a bad nursing home. It was a murder business that killed elderly people for money. This is huge, Detective Rodriguez said when she heard the recording. This could bring down an entire criminal network that's been murdering seniors across the state. But as important as that was, I still had my own problems to deal with. I was 73 years old, homeless, and my family had turned against me. What was I going to do with the rest of my life? That's when Betty surprised me with an announcement that would change everything. Betty took my hands in hers and looked me straight in the eyes. Martha, she said, I've been thinking about this while we were talking to the police, and I have something important to tell you. I could see she was nervous about whatever she was going to say. What is it, Betty? I want you to come live with me. Permanently. My house is too big for just one person anyway, and after everything we've been through together, I've realized that we make a pretty good team. I was so surprised I didn't know what to say. Betty, that's very kind of you, but I can't impose on you like that. You've already done so much for me. Impose. Betty laughed. Martha, you saved my life tonight just as much as I saved yours. Besides, do you remember what we used to say when we were young mothers and our husbands were working all those long hours? I smiled, remembering. We said that women friends are the family you choose for yourself. Exactly. And I choose you. Plus, someone needs to help me take care of my garden. It's getting too much for these old bones. Before I could answer, Rick came over with more news. Mrs. Thompson, Detective Rodriguez wants to talk to you about something important. Detective Rodriguez approached us with a smile. The first time I had seen her look happy all day. Mrs. Thompson, I just got off the phone with the district attorney's office. Because your case has exposed this criminal network at Shady Oaks, you're going to be eligible for a substantial reward from the state. Plus, your insurance company is very interested in the evidence we've gathered. What do you mean? I asked. Well, your son had taken out a life insurance policy on you just 3 months ago, a very large one. The insurance company was suspicious about the timing, especially after what happened today. They're going to cancel that policy and investigate whether David committed insurance fraud. But what does that mean for me? It means that the insurance company is so grateful for the evidence you've provided that they're offering you a settlement. Plus, the state has a victim compensation fund for elderly people who have been financially abused. Between those two sources, you should have enough money to rebuild your life however you want. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After losing everything, I was going to be financially secure again. But there was still one more thing I needed to know about. Detective Rodriguez, what's going to happen to Emma and Jake? Their father is going to prison, and I don't think Susan was innocent in all this either. Detective Rodriguez nodded. You're right about Susan. We found evidence that she was actively involved in planning the fraud. She'll be arrested as soon as David is well enough to be questioned. As for the children. She paused, looking thoughtful. Emma is 16, And Jake is 14. They'll need a guardian. Do they have any other family? My heart started beating faster. They have me. I'm their grandmother. Would you be interested in becoming their legal guardian? I looked at Betty, who smiled and nodded encouragingly. Yes, I said firmly. Those children are innocent in all this. They shouldn't have to suffer because their parents made terrible choices. 3 hours later, we were finally able to leave the scene of the fire. Betty drove me to the hospital to check on Emma, while Rick went home to edit all the video evidence for the police. Emma was awake and alert when we got to her room, but she looked scared and confused. "Grandma," she said as soon as she saw me, "the police told me that Dad is here in the hospital too, but they won't let me see him. They said he's under arrest. What's going on?" I sat down on the edge of her bed and took her hands. This was going to be the hardest conversation of my life. "Emma, honey, I need to tell you some things that are going to be very difficult to hear. But I need you to know that no matter what happens, I love you and Jake more than anything in the world." Over the next hour, I told Emma everything that had happened. I explained about the papers her father had tricked me into signing, about his plan to put me in the nursing home, about the fire, and about how he had drugged her when she started asking questions. Emma cried a lot during my explanation, but she was stronger than I had expected. "I knew something was wrong," she said when I finished. "Dad has been acting strange for months, and Mom has been really mean to you lately. I heard them arguing about money a lot, but I never thought." "You never thought your parents would try to hurt your grandmother," I finished gently. "And you shouldn't have had to think about that. This is not your fault, sweetheart. But what's going to happen to me and Jake now, if both Mom and Dad go to prison?" "You're going to come live with me," I said. "That is, if you want to. I know I'm just an old lady, and you probably want to live with someone younger and more fun." "Are you kidding?" Emma interrupted, throwing her arms around me. "Grandma, you're the coolest person I know. You rented a car to drive yourself home from the hospital, you caught Dad stealing your stuff, and you basically solved a whole criminal conspiracy. I want to be just like you when I'm older." I hugged her tightly, feeling happier than I had in months. "What about Jake?" Emma asked. "Does he know what's happening?" "Not yet. Susan is supposed to tell him, but since she's probably going to be arrested soon, I think I should be the one to talk to him." The next morning, Betty and I drove to David and Susan's house to pick up Jake. Susan answered the door, and she looked terrible. Her hair was messy, her eyes were red from crying, and she seemed to have aged 10 years overnight. "I suppose you've come to gloat," Susan said bitterly when she saw me. "I've come to get my grandson," I replied calmly. "The police told me they'll be arresting you later today, and Jake needs to be with family." "Family?" Susan laughed, but it was a harsh, angry sound. "You destroyed our family. If you had just gone to that nursing home like David wanted, none of this would have happened." "Susan," Betty said firmly, "your husband tried to murder Martha and burn down her house. He drugged his own daughter. This is not Martha's fault." Jake appeared behind his mother, carrying a backpack. He was a quiet, sensitive boy who looked like he had been crying. "Grandma," he said in a small voice, "is it true that Dad tried to hurt you?" I knelt down so I could look him in the eyes. "Jake, your dad made some very bad choices because he was scared and desperate. But that doesn't mean he stopped loving you and Emma. Sometimes good people do terrible things when they're frightened. Mom says I have to go live with you now." "Only if you want to," I said. "I know this is all very confusing and scary, but I want you to know that you'll always have a home with me, no matter what." Jake hugged me tightly. "I want to stay with you, Grandma. And I want to see Emma too." As we were leaving, Susan called out to me from the doorway. "Martha," she said, and for the first time she sounded sad instead of angry. "I really am sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I never wanted it to go this far." I turned back to look at her. "Susan, I hope you get the help you need. And I hope someday you can have a relationship with your children again. But right now they need to be safe, and they need to heal from all this trauma. That afternoon, Emma was released from the hospital, and for the first time in years, I had both my grandchildren with me in Betty's house. Betty had already started preparing the spare bedrooms, and she seemed as excited as I was about having young people in the house again. "It's going to be like running a boarding house," Betty said cheerfully. "But a fun boarding house, with good food and lots of laughter." That evening, while Emma and Jake were getting settled in their new rooms, I sat on Betty's front porch with Whiskers on my lap, thinking about everything that had happened. Just 1 week ago, I had been a lonely old lady living by herself, worried about dizzy spells and thinking my biggest problem was a heart condition. Now I was living with my best friend, raising my 2 grandchildren, and apparently about to receive enough money to be comfortable for the rest of my life. But most importantly, I had learned something about myself that I hadn't known before. I was stronger than I had ever imagined. When David had tried to steal my life away from me, I could have given up. I could have accepted that I was just a helpless old lady who couldn't fight back. Instead, I had fought for myself. I had gathered evidence, made allies, and refused to be a victim. "You know what, Whiskers?" I said to my cat, who purred in response. "I think the best years of my life might still be ahead of me." But just as I was feeling proud of how everything had worked out, Betty came out onto the porch with a worried expression on her face. "Martha," she said, "I just got a very strange phone call." "What kind of phone call?" It was a man who said he was calling from Shady Oaks nursing home. He said he needed to speak with you urgently about completing the arrangement with your son. I felt my blood turn cold. Did he say anything else? He said that just because David was in the hospital didn't mean their deal was off. He said they had already prepared a space for you, and they expected you to honor the commitment within the next few days. "But the police know all about Shady Oaks now," I said. "They're going to shut that place down." Betty shook her head. "That's just it, Martha. I called Detective Rodriguez after I got the call. She said they tried to raid Shady Oaks this morning, but the building was completely empty. Everyone disappeared overnight. The staff, the patients, everyone." I felt a chill run down my spine. What does that mean? It means the people running that murder business are still out there. And apparently, they still consider you unfinished business. Before I could respond, the lights went out in Betty's house. Then the streetlights went out too. The whole neighborhood was suddenly plunged into darkness. "That's not a normal power outage," Betty whispered. "Someone cut the electricity." From inside the house, I heard Emma scream. And that's when I realized that David might have been in jail, but the real criminals behind this whole scheme were still free. And they were coming for me tonight. "Emma! Jake!" I shouted, rushing toward the dark house with Betty right behind me. We stumbled through the front door and found Emma and Jake huddled together in the living room, holding each other tightly. "Grandma, there are men outside," Emma whispered urgently. "I saw them through my bedroom window. They have flashlights and they're surrounding the house." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The people from Shady Oaks had found us, and now they were coming to finish what David had started. "Betty, where's your phone?" I asked. "Right here," she said, pulling it out of her pocket. But when she tried to call 911, nothing happened. "It's not working. No signal at all. They must have some kind of device that blocks phone signals," I said. "Emma, Jake, listen to me very carefully. We need to get out of this house right now." "But where can we go?" Jake asked, his voice shaking with fear. Before I could answer, we heard a voice coming from outside, a man speaking through some kind of megaphone or loudspeaker. "Mrs. Thompson, we know you're in there. This doesn't have to be difficult. Just come outside, and we'll handle everything quickly and quietly. No one else needs to get hurt." "Like heck they won't hurt anyone else," Betty muttered angrily. "Emma, Jake, do you remember the old storm cellar in my backyard?" Both kids nodded. "Good. We're going to sneak out the back door and hide there until we can figure out how to get help. We crept through Betty's kitchen toward the back door, staying low and trying not to make any noise. Through the windows, I could see flashlight beams moving around the house as the men searched for the best way to get inside. "Emma! Jake!" I shouted, rushing toward the dark house with Betty right behind me. We stumbled through the front door and found Emma and Jake huddled together in the living room, holding each other tightly. "Grandma, there are men outside," Emma whispered urgently. "I saw them through my bedroom window. They have flashlights and they're surrounding the house." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The people from Shady Oaks had found us, and now they were coming to finish what David had started. "Betty, where's your phone?" I asked. "Right here," she said, pulling it out of her pocket. But when she tried to call 911, nothing happened. "It's not working. No signal at all." "They must have some kind of device that blocks phone signals," I said. "Emma, Jake, listen to me very carefully. We need to get out of this house right now." "But where can we go?" Jake asked, his voice shaking with fear. Before I could answer, we heard a voice coming from outside, a man speaking through some kind of megaphone or loudspeaker. "Mrs. Thompson, we know you're in there. This doesn't have to be difficult. Just come outside, and we'll handle everything quickly and quietly. No one else needs to get hurt." "Like heck they won't hurt anyone else," Betty muttered angrily. "Emma, Jake, do you remember the old storm cellar in my backyard?" Both kids nodded. "Good. We're going to sneak out the back door and hide there until we can figure out how to get help." We crept through Betty's kitchen toward the back door, staying low and trying not to make any noise. Through the windows, I could see flashlight beams moving around the house as the men searched for the best way to get inside. Just as we reached the back door, we heard the front door being kicked in. "They're inside," Betty whispered. "Hurry." We slipped out the back door and ran across the dark yard toward the old storm cellar. It was a small underground room that Betty's late husband had built years ago for tornado protection. The entrance was hidden under a wooden covering behind her garden shed. Betty lifted the wooden cover while I helped Emma and Jake climb down the narrow stairs into the cellar. Betty and I followed, and I pulled the cover closed over our heads just as we heard men's voices in the backyard. The storm cellar was tiny, dark, and smelled like dirt and old wood. But at least it was a hiding place. "Are they going to find us?" Jake whispered. "Not if we're very quiet," I whispered back. Through the thin wooden cover above us, we could hear the men searching Betty's yard. "Check the shed," one voice said. "Look behind those bushes," said another. "They can't have gone far. The old lady has a heart condition. She couldn't run very fast." If only they knew how much running I had been doing lately. We huddled together in the dark cellar for what felt like hours, listening to the men search the yard above us. Emma was holding my hand tightly, and Jake was pressed against my other side. Betty was sitting near the entrance, listening carefully to everything happening outside. Finally, the voices started to fade away. "I think they're moving to search other houses in the neighborhood," Betty whispered. "We can't stay here all night," I said quietly. "We need to find a way to get help." "My friend Rick lives about 6 blocks from here," Betty said. "If we can get to his house, he can call the police." "But how do we get there without being seen?" Emma asked. I thought for a moment. "Do you still have that tunnel, Betty?" "What tunnel?" Jake asked. Betty smiled in the darkness. "When my husband built this storm cellar, he also dug a tunnel that connects to the storm drain under the street. He was a little paranoid about nuclear war back in the 1960s. I haven't been down there in years, but it might still be passable." "A tunnel." Emma sounded excited despite our dangerous situation. "That's like something from a spy movie." "It's going to be dirty and scary," Betty warned. "And I'm not sure where exactly it comes out." "It's better than staying here," I said. "Let's try it." Betty led us to the back of the storm cellar, where there was a small opening covered by an old piece of plywood. The opening was just big enough for a person to crawl through. "Ladies first," Betty said, moving the plywood aside. I went first, crawling on my hands and knees through a narrow dirt tunnel. It was pitch black and smelled awful, but I kept thinking about Emma and Jake behind me, counting on me to keep them safe. The tunnel seemed to go on forever. My knees were getting scraped up, and dirt was falling in my hair, but I kept crawling forward. Finally, I saw a dim light ahead. The tunnel was ending at what looked like a storm drain opening. I crawled out of the tunnel and found myself in a concrete drainage ditch under the street. Looking up, I could see streetlights through a metal grate above my head. One by one, Betty, Emma, and Jake crawled out of the tunnel after me. "Where are we?" Emma asked, brushing dirt off her clothes. Betty looked around and pointed to a ladder leading up to the street grate. "I think we're about 3 blocks from Rick's house. But we need to be very careful. Those men might still be looking for us." We climbed up the ladder and carefully lifted the metal grate just enough to peek out at street level. The neighborhood looked quiet, but I could see a few cars parked on nearby streets that hadn't been there before. "Those cars don't belong to people who live around here," Betty said. "I think the Shady Oaks people are still watching the area." "Then how do we get to Rick's house?" Jake asked. That's when I had an idea. "We don't go to Rick's house. We go somewhere they would never think to look for us." "Where?" Emma asked. I smiled. "We go to the hospital to visit your father." Everyone stared at me like I had lost my mind. "Think about it," I explained. "The hospital has security guards, police officers, and lots of people around all the time. Plus, David is being guarded because he's under arrest. The Shady Oaks people would never expect us to show up there." "But Grandma," Emma said, "I don't want to see Dad right now. Not after what he did." "You don't have to see him, sweetheart. We just need to get to safety, and the hospital is the safest place I can think of." Betty nodded slowly. "It's actually a brilliant idea. Plus, Detective Rodriguez said she wanted to talk to you again anyway. She might be at the hospital checking on David." We made our way carefully through the dark streets, staying in shadows and avoiding the suspicious cars. Twice we had to hide behind bushes when we saw men with flashlights searching other yards. It took us almost an hour to walk the 2 miles to the hospital, but finally we could see the bright lights of the emergency room entrance. "Almost there," I whispered encouragingly to Emma and Jake, who were tired from all the walking and crawling. But just as we were crossing the hospital parking lot, a black car suddenly pulled up next to us and 3 men got out. "Mrs. Thompson," the driver said in a calm, cold voice. "You've caused us a lot of trouble tonight." I recognized the voice. It was the same man who had called Betty's house earlier. "Run!" I shouted to Emma and Jake. "Get inside the hospital." The kids started running toward the emergency room entrance, but one of the men was faster. He caught up with Jake and grabbed him by the arm. "Let go of my grandson," I yelled, but another man had grabbed Emma too. "Now, Mrs. Thompson," the cold-voiced man said, "here's what's going to happen. You're going to come with us quietly, and we'll let the children go. If you make a scene or try to call for help, well, accidents can happen to young people too." I felt more angry than scared. These criminals had already destroyed my family, burned down my house, and terrorized my grandchildren. I wasn't going to let them win. "Betty," I said loudly, "remember what we learned in that self-defense class we took last year?" Betty looked confused for a second, then understood what I was trying to do. "You mean the class about making lots of noise and attracting attention?" "Exactly," I said. Then I took a deep breath and screamed as loudly as I could. "Help! Someone is trying to kidnap us. Call the police." The men holding Emma and Jake looked shocked. They obviously hadn't expected a 73-year-old grandmother to fight back so loudly. "Help!" Betty joined in, screaming even louder than me. "Kidnappers! Help us!" Emma and Jake understood immediately and started screaming too. Soon all 4 of us were making so much noise that lights started coming on in the hospital and people began running out of the emergency room entrance. "Security!" someone shouted. Call security. The three men realized they had lost the element of surprise. They let go of Emma and Jake and started running back toward their car. But they were too late. Two hospital security guards came running across the parking lot, and behind them I could see Detective Rodriguez getting out of a police car. Stop right there. Detective Rodriguez shouted, pointing her gun at the fleeing men. One of the men made it to their car and drove away, but the other two were caught by the security guards. As the police put handcuffs on the captured men, Detective Rodriguez came over to check on us. Mrs. Thompson, what are you doing here? I thought you were staying somewhere safe. We were, I said, until these people found us. They've been hunting us all night. Well, they made a big mistake coming to a hospital, Detective Rodriguez said with satisfaction. Hospitals have the best security cameras in the city. We got everything on video, the attempted kidnapping, the threats, everything. She looked at the two handcuffed men. Plus, now we have actual suspects we can question about the Shady Oaks operation. As we walked into the hospital to give our statements, Emma took my hand. Grandma, she said, you were amazing out there. The way you fought back and protected us. I've never seen anything like it. Well, I said, feeling proud and exhausted at the same time. I guess your old grandmother still has a few surprises left in her. But even as I said it, I knew this wasn't over yet. The leader of the Shady Oaks group had escaped, and he was still out there somewhere. He would probably try again. Detective Rodriguez seemed to be thinking the same thing. Mrs. Thompson, she said as we reached the hospital entrance, I'm afraid you and your grandchildren are going to need police protection until we catch the rest of these criminals. For how long? I asked. Could be days, could be weeks. These people are very dangerous, and they obviously don't give up easily. I looked at Emma and Jake, who had been through so much trauma already. They deserved to feel safe and start healing from everything that had happened. Detective Rodriguez, I said, I have an idea, but it's going to require me to do something very dangerous. What kind of idea? She asked suspiciously. I took a deep breath. I want to set a trap. Use myself as bait to draw out the leader and end this once and for all. Absolutely not, Betty said immediately. Martha, you've already risked your life enough times. But think about it, I insisted. As long as that man is free, Emma and Jake will never be safe. He knows they can identify him. He knows they're witnesses to attempted kidnapping. He'll keep coming after all of us. Detective Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, considering my proposal. What exactly did you have in mind? She asked finally. I smiled. Sometimes the best way to catch a predator is to give him exactly what he thinks he wants. We're going to let him think he succeeded, I said. We're going to make him believe he finally got me. And that's when I explained the most dangerous plan of my entire 73-year-old life. My plan was simple but risky. We would stage my death and make the Shady Oaks criminals think they had finally succeeded. Then, when they came out of hiding to collect their payment or tie up loose ends, the police would be waiting to arrest them. It's too dangerous, Detective Rodriguez said for the third time as we sat in a conference room at the police station the next morning. If something goes wrong, you could actually end up dead. Detective, I said firmly, I'm 73 years old. I've already lived a full life. But my grandchildren are just starting theirs, and they deserve to grow up without looking over their shoulders every day, wondering when those criminals might come back. Emma grabbed my hand. Grandma, I don't want you to do this. There has to be another way. Honey, I said gently, sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to stand up to him. And these people are the worst kind of bullies. They hurt elderly people who can't defend themselves. Detective Rodriguez sighed. Okay, let's say we try this plan. How exactly would we fake your death convincingly? I had been thinking about this all night. Well, we know they've been watching the hospital. What if there was an accident here? Maybe my heart condition got worse, and I had another medical emergency that went wrong. The hospital would never agree to fake a patient's death, Detective Rodriguez said. They might, said a new voice from the doorway. Dr. Williams, the young doctor who had performed my heart procedure, was standing there with a serious expression. Mrs. Thompson, I heard about what's been happening to you. This is personal for me now. These people made threats against one of my patients. He sat down at the conference table with us. I've been thinking about this situation, and I have an idea that might work. What if we staged a cardiac event that required you to be transferred to a different hospital? During the transfer, the ambulance could have an accident, maybe go off a bridge into the river. But how would I survive that? I asked. Dr. Williams smiled. You wouldn't be in the ambulance when it went into the river. We'd have you hidden safely somewhere else. The ambulance would be empty except for medical equipment to make it look real. Detective Rodriguez was starting to look interested. That might actually work. The Shady Oaks people would think you died in the accident, and they'd probably come out of hiding to celebrate or collect payment. But where would we hide Grandma during all this? Emma asked. I have an idea about that too, Betty said. My cousin Margaret lives on a farm about 50 miles outside the city. She's been asking me to visit for years. Martha could stay there until it's safe to come back. Rick, who had been quietly listening to everything, suddenly got excited. And I could help with the technical stuff. I could create fake news reports about the accident, maybe even put together a fake funeral service to make it look really convincing. I looked around the table at all these people who were willing to risk their own safety to help me and my grandchildren. A month ago, I had felt like a lonely old woman with no one to depend on. Now I had a whole team of friends working together to protect my family. Okay, I said. Let's do it. The next 3 days were spent planning every detail of the fake accident. Dr. Williams arranged for me to be readmitted to the hospital with chest pains. Detective Rodriguez coordinated with the police and fire departments to stage the ambulance crash. Betty packed a bag for my stay at her cousin's farm. And Rick worked on creating fake news reports and social media posts about my death. Emma and Jake were the hardest part. They had to act like they were grieving their grandmother, which meant staying away from school and looking sad whenever they went out in public. I hate this, Emma said on the 3rd day as we were going over the final details. I hate pretending that you're dead. It's only temporary, sweetheart, I assured her. In a few days, this will all be over and we can start our new life together. That evening, Dr. Williams gave me a mild sedative that would make me appear unconscious during the ambulance ride. The plan was for me to be switched out with a medical dummy just before the ambulance went off the bridge. Are you sure about this, Mrs. Thompson? Detective Rodriguez asked one more time as I was getting ready to leave for the hospital. I'm sure, I said. But Detective, promise me something. If this plan doesn't work, if something happens to me, promise you'll take care of Emma and Jake. Nothing's going to happen to you, she said firmly. But I promise. The next morning, I was admitted to the hospital with severe chest pains. Word spread quickly through the hospital staff, some of whom had been contacted by the Shady Oaks people to report on my condition. That afternoon, Dr. Williams announced that my condition was getting worse and I needed to be transferred to a specialized cardiac unit at City General Hospital across town. At 6 p.m., the ambulance arrived to transport me. I was on a stretcher, apparently unconscious from the sedatives, with monitoring equipment beeping around me. But here's what the Shady Oaks criminals watching the hospital didn't know. Halfway to City General, the ambulance pulled into an abandoned warehouse where Detective Rodriguez was waiting with a van. In less than 2 minutes, I was switched out with a medical dummy that looked remarkably like an elderly woman, and I was driven to safety while the ambulance continued toward its staged crash. I watched from the van as the ambulance drove toward the Riverside Bridge. The police had closed the bridge to other traffic, and news crews were already in position to film the accident. Right on schedule, the ambulance swerved as if the driver had lost control, crashed through the bridge barrier, and plunged into the river below. Police divers immediately jumped in to search for survivors, but of course they found only the medical dummy. Rick had done an amazing job with the fake news coverage. Within an hour, every local news station was reporting that Martha Thompson, the elderly woman who had recently exposed a criminal conspiracy targeting seniors, had died in a tragic ambulance accident. "It's working," Detective Rodriguez said as we watched the news reports from our hiding place. "Our surveillance teams are already reporting increased activity from known associates of the Shady Oaks Group." That night, I was driven to Betty's cousin Margaret's farm, where I would stay hidden until the police operation was complete. Margaret was a spry 70-year-old who immediately understood the situation and welcomed me like an old friend. "Don't you worry about a thing, dear," she said as she showed me to the guest room. "You'll be safe here. And if any bad men come around, they'll have to deal with my shotgun." For the next 2 days, I stayed hidden on the farm while Detective Rodriguez kept me updated on the police operation. The plan was working perfectly. The Shady Oaks criminals were coming out of hiding, confident that their biggest threat was dead. On the 3rd day, Detective Rodriguez called with the news I had been waiting for. "We got them," she said excitedly. "All of them. The leader, the staff who disappeared from Shady Oaks, and 3 other people involved in the conspiracy. They were meeting at a warehouse to divide up the money they thought they'd earned by having you killed." "It's really over?" I asked. "It's really over. You can come home now, Mrs. Thompson. You're officially alive again." The hardest part was telling Emma and Jake that I was okay. They had been staying with Betty, trying to act like grieving grandchildren while secretly knowing I was safe. When Detective Rodriguez brought me back to Betty's house that evening, both kids threw themselves into my arms and started crying. "I never want to pretend you're dead again," Emma sobbed. "Never again," I promised. "From now on, the only surprises in our lives are going to be good ones." A month later, we had our first good surprise. The insurance settlement and victim compensation money had come through, and I was able to buy a beautiful house just 2 blocks away from Betty. It was big enough for me, Emma, Jake, and Whiskers, with a guest room for Betty whenever she wanted to stay over. Rick got an A+ on his college project, a documentary about elder abuse that featured our story. He also got a job offer from a major news network that was impressed with his investigative skills. David recovered from his injuries and was sentenced to 15 years in prison for attempted murder, elder abuse, fraud, and arson. Susan received 5 years for her role in the conspiracy. I visit David sometimes, not because I've forgiven him completely, but because I still remember the little boy he used to be. Maybe someday he'll find his way back to being that person. Emma and Jake are thriving in their new school and have made lots of friends. Emma wants to study law and become a detective like Detective Rodriguez. Jake wants to be a veterinarian so he can take care of animals like Whiskers. The biggest surprise came 6 months later, when I got a call from the State Attorney General's office. The evidence from our case had led to the discovery of a massive criminal network that had been murdering elderly people across 5 different states. Because of my testimony and the evidence Rick had gathered, dozens of criminals were arrested and hundreds of elderly people were saved. "Mrs. Thompson," the Attorney General said when she called to thank me, "you've probably saved more lives than any private citizen in the history of this state." "I was just trying to save my own life," I told her. "I never intended to become some kind of hero." But as I hung up the phone and looked around my new living room, where Emma was doing homework, Jake was playing with Whiskers, and Betty was reading a book, I realized something important. Sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is simply refuse to give up. When life tries to make you feel helpless and defeated, when people try to convince you that you're too old or too weak to fight back, the most powerful thing you can do is prove them wrong. I'm 73 years old, and I've learned that age is just a number. What matters is how much courage you have in your heart and how far you're willing to go to protect the people you love. As for my son David, well, that's a lesson I hope other families never have to learn. Love your children, but don't be blind to their faults. And never ever sign papers you don't understand, even if they come from someone you trust. Today, Emma and Jake call me Grandma the Great, because of everything we went through together. Betty and I have started a support group for elderly people who have been victims of financial abuse. And every morning when I wake up in my new house, With my cat purring beside me and my grandchildren safe down the hall, I remember the most important lesson of all. You're never too old to start over, and you're never too weak to fight for what's right. Sometimes life gives you a second chance to become the person you were always meant to be. I'm grateful every day that I was brave enough to take mine. And that, my friends, is the story of how a 73-year-old grandmother fought back against criminals, saved her grandchildren, and learned that the best adventures in life can happen when you least expect them.